When the airplane and public transit manufacturer Bombardier fell on hard times in Quebec, that province immediately stepped forward with a $1 billion offer to help the company right the ship. The argument was Bombardier is simply too important to Quebec to allow it to fail. Could the same argument be made for the steel industry in Ontario? Should this province step in and assist, for example, SR Steel Algoma in Sault Ste. Marie, which is in bankruptcy protection as we speak? Let's debate this with David Orazietti, Ontario's Minister of Government and Consumer Services and the MPP for Sault Ste. Marie. Charlotte Yates, Provost at the University of Guelph, who joins us on the line from the Royal City. Ian Lee, Assistant Professor at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University in Ottawa. And Elena Cherney, the Wall Street Journal's Global Energy Editor. And we're delighted to have the four of you on our program here today. You flew in just for the day. We're really grateful you did that for us, Ian. Thanks so much.
My great pleasure.
Elena, let's start with this. What's the state of the steel industry in North America today?
So I think it's very interesting that we're comparing steel with Bombardier, because steel really is so much about what's happening outside of Canada. It's not just about bailing out one company or one factory. It's really a story that has a lot to do with what's happening in China. We all know that demand in China for a lot of raw industrial goods has slowed considerably. Demand is still growing, but much less quickly than it was previously. And that's what was fueling, actually, global production. In fact, that's the reason that so many companies bought up steel mills in Canada, because there was so much demand out of China. That has slowed. But not only critically has that slowed, but China is now feeding into the glut. China is producing steel and adding to what is effectively a global glut in steel that makes the global glut in oil look less of a problem than many people in Alberta would think. So I think that's what we want to think about is just this global glut.
All right, Minister, tell us, in a city that you represent where perhaps 2 out of every 3 people in that city have their job dependent on SR Steel Algoma being healthy, how would you characterize the state of the company right now?
Well, this is a very serious situation. We've been through this before in the community, but this feels different, and I think most people in the community get that sense. In part, in the past, it has seemed that the restructuring involved being a little leaner and being a little more efficient, and you were able to make the transition and get on with things. The reality now is, as is being highlighted, is the glut of steel in the market, the dumping by various jurisdictions into the North American market. And we're either going to have trade rules and trade practices that are WTO compliant, or we're not. I mean, we have a jurisdiction in China that is operating state-owned industry that are not really a market economy, and we can't expect that North American steel producers, with all of the rules and regulations around environment, health and safety, wages, other union practices that we all support and all adds to our quality of life in North America, compete against industry that is state-owned and state-subsidized with the Chinese government.
In which case, Ian Lee, is it fair to say then that SR Steel Algoma in the Sioux, for example, hasn't necessarily done anything wrong itself? There are bigger forces at play here that are somewhat out of its control.
There's no doubt that there are things beyond their control, but we have to put 2 things out. First off, yes, there's suffering in the Sioux, there's suffering in Hamilton. Let there be no mistake about that, although I do not think that we should be using that as our argument for bailouts or helping out firms that are in bankruptcy or about to go bankrupt. If that's the criterion, then we should be looking at all of the, I did look at the bankruptcy statistics for Canada, business bankruptcies, and they're across multiple sectors in this country: retailing, accommodation, manufacturing, service sector, and there's suffering in every one of those sectors. So we can't be looking at that. And the second thing I just want to put on the table is, I agree with everything that's been said about China. China has been cheating. How do we know? Because anti-dumping ruling has been made against them in both the European Union and in the States. Anti-dumping tariffs are being imposed on them. But this is not going to go away. China accounts for 50% of the world steel output. Secondly, quickly, it's $12 trillion. Second largest GDP in the world. And quite bluntly, I don't think that Canada, with our puny little $2 trillion, is going to be able to get into a bidding war with India and with China and outspend them and outbid them in trying to prop up an industry that must go through massive restructuring. In fact, my final point is the amount that's been called to be shut down this industry to get back to rough supply and demand is closing down essentially the equivalent of the output of all of Europe and Japan. That's the magnitude of the problem facing this industry.
I am going to, Charlotte, welcome you to the conversation by asking you first to listen to this clip from your fellow academician in the post-secondary world. This is Mike Moffat from the Ivy School, who had this to say about this issue and whether or not there's a role for government helping SR Steel, Algoma, and others, as he did a few weeks ago on this program. Roll the clip, please.
This is a company that I would consider to be too big to fail almost. That this looks again a lot like the auto bailout, where you start to look and go, okay, well, what happens, if Chrysler goes down in Windsor? I think this is a similar situation there, where you've got this company of 2,000 to 3,000 people, you've got all the pensioners, and then you have all the spin-off jobs around that. So this would be devastating to that community. So we're all hoping that they can find a buyer, and if they can't, then I think all levels of government have some very difficult decisions to make.
Charlotte, in your view, is there a role for government to play in this SR Steel Algoma story?
So I think the answer to that lies in the steel as part of an advanced manufacturing ecosystem, if you will. Steel alone employs 20,000 people directly. There's about 100,000 employees indirectly linked, 5,000 suppliers. So that's a whole network or ecosystem of individuals, small businesses, and so on that are linked to that industry. But steel itself is part of the advanced manufacturing ecosystem where it supplies the automotive industry. It has until recently been a major supplier to the oil industry. So I think the question is, what place does advanced manufacturing have in the Canadian economy, and what role does government have to play? And I think there's a very important role here. If Canada decides that it wants an advanced manufacturing sector, then it needs to provide various levels of support. It can be both direct, it can be transitional to help aid the industry in restructuring. But in addition, it needs to provide R&D and innovation supports, because advanced manufacturing is one of the hubs of spin-offs for all kinds of innovation, investment. It has one of the greatest economic multipliers of any industry. So to allow this sector to fail is going to have huge reverberations, far more than, say, one of the guests mentioned, bankruptcies in accommodation, retail. Those are very, very different in terms of their spin-off effects, in terms of their total employment effects. So yes, there's a role for government, but it has to be framed within what is the place of advanced manufacturing within Canada.
All right, in which case, David Orazietti, I'd like to know what you're at the cabinet table urging your government to do about this.
So I want to be clear with a couple of things. First of all, our government is playing a role in supporting industry across the province, but the steel industry in particular. And in my community, with respect to SR Steel, we've created programs like cogeneration, where the steel mill has made a $135 million investment to reduce their energy emissions and their energy costs, which is helping. We've invested in short-line rail to support the transportation infrastructure for SR. Last summer, we announced $30 million toward a modernization initiative of $240 million that is yet to be realized. When we talk about bailouts, what I'm here to talk about today is the importance of government leveling the playing field and creating fair trade opportunities.
So what does that require?
So what it requires, quite honestly, is the federal government modernizing the trade remedy system. The Canadian Steel Producers Association has been advocating for a modern trade remedy system, which is not in place today. The SEMA legislation, the Special Import Measures Act, is 1985 vintage, 31 years old, and it does not reflect the global trading realities today that these companies face.
So if I understand you, it's nothing that so much the Ontario government can do by passing a new policy or by bailing out or doing something it did for GM and Chrysler. You're talking about something else entirely.
Well,
I'm
talking about the importance of the federal government in terms of jobs nationwide. This is a national issue. This isn't just an Ontario issue, although predominantly the 3 integrated steel producers are here in Ontario, but there are 22,000 roughly direct jobs across the country, 100,000 indirect jobs, and the federal government needs to adopt a modern trade remedy system. we look at other jurisdictions like the United States, the European Union, and India, for that matter, that have all imposed duties and tariffs on steel that is being dumped. Why is Canada not imposing these duties? We're not talking about protectionist strategies. We're talking about fair trade policies.
All right, let me get Ellen on this. Is that an option?
Well, it may well be an option, but it's not going to solve the problem for the steel industry globally. So just to give an idea of the scope of this, Canada produces 14 million tons a year of steel, which is fairly paltry globally. But of that 14 million tons, 8 million is exported. So right now, and I'm not arguing that this is, these are bad jobs to have or that we shouldn't protect jobs necessarily, but we are feeding into this global glut. So if we were to take steps to subsidize this industry, we would be subsidizing essentially the global problem. And I'm not sure, we need to think about, is that helping? Or is that simply propping up something that, you're arguing that China is dumping? I think we need to take into account sort of the global demand, and it's out of whack.
But I don't hear him say we got to subsidize. I hear him saying we need better rules.
Well, we need to protect against imports.
Imports that are not WTO compliant. I mean, they're circumventing the legislation and the rules. Either we're going to have rules that we're going to play by in the industry, or we're not. And if we're going to have rules in Canada with health and safety, with emissions, with taxation, with other trade rules in other jurisdictions, then we can't have one country simply saying, well, we're going to have a make work program in our country to keep people artificially employed and then dump all that steel into the global market.
Okay, let's get Ellen on that, and then Ian.
We're still all told making too much steel, more steel than there is demand for. And I think that's where we come back to steel is a commodity. And the differentiator here, this is not the same, arguably, as Bombardier. The case that has been made for Bombardier is that this is a high-value manufactured product that, in fact, represents the kind of accomplishment for manufacturing in Canada that very few companies can claim to have accomplished. And that loss, it is a global champion that can sustain an entire hub and an aerospace industry. And that's something that would be irreplaceable if lost.
Ian Lee?
First, I do agree with the minister on the point that we have to update the trading rules, and I hope that we can turn the conversation away from, it's always in the sense of, do we bail them out, do we not bail them out, and that's it, we have no other policy options. There are many other policy options, extending EI temporarily, updating the trading rules, and so forth. But I want to go back to what Charlotte said and just put this into context, because there is this, what Andrew Coyne, I quote him all the time, this fetish for manufacturing in Canada. There's somehow, it's special, they're unique, and they're much better than jobs as professors, for example, or you as a broadcaster.
Because the jobs pay well, because
so
they
do
have
services.
such spin-offs. But the spin-offs are different.
But let me throw out the numbers out there, the big picture numbers. We are overwhelmingly a services sector's economy. Everyone debating this right now is in the services sector. You're in broadcasting, I'm in academia, you're in journalism, you're in politics and government. That's all, and Charlotte is in the academy as a provost. This is all the services sector. 80% of GDP. And this is not something unique to Canada. All the OECD countries, since World War II until today, have, and I've got the graphs and the data from OECD on this, have declined from over a third of GDP to down to 10 to 12 to 14%. We're around 12% of GDP. And so I'm not saying that therefore let's go and kill these jobs. That's not where I'm going. What I'm saying is we think that our manufacturing is far more important than it is. The vast majority of my students, and I've been teaching for 29 years, I've never had a student go into manufacturing or upstream natural resources. Every last one of them for 29 years go into all the downstream retailing and government and finance and pension fund management and journalism and so forth. That's where the jobs of the future are. That's the economy of the future.
But do we therefore say, therefore we're not prepared to... All right, sorry, you go ahead, Charlotte, you take it on.
I couldn't disagree with you more. I agree with you in many cases about, obviously it's indisputable that a large number, in fact the majority of jobs are in some element of either public or private service. But what I think is being forgotten is there's incredibly tight linkages between, and we know this, between manufacturing, research and development, between various of the higher end services. They form a type of ecosystem, which once one leaves, then you lose actually some of the higher valued areas of the service sector, of R&D. The auto industry is a good case in point, as is the steel industry. So for that reason, to suggest that you can choose a service economy, or you should choose a service economy, and somehow it will not be disrupted by abandoning advanced manufacturing, including steel, would be mistaken, as there is that kind of tight linkage.
But Charlotte, let me come back to your point and to follow up on what Elena said. Let's distinguish sharply between high-end advanced manufacturing, of which I include the auto industry, on which I include Bombardier and very sophisticated avionics and making these incredibly high-tech airplanes, as distinct from making a commodity like coal. Like steel. I'm sorry, I misspoke. I mean, steel, sure, is more high-tech today than it was 20 or 30 years ago. But to compare making of steel, which is made by a lot of developing countries, to compare that to the making of an advanced avionics technology called the C-Series, I mean, is not, I think, is not being truthful.
Different.
They're very different.
No, I don't think it has to do with being truthful or untruthful. What I think you're right, that there's really a distinctiveness to Bombardier, which is even distinct from the automotive industry. Yes. But let me be clear that when we talk about a plan to save the steel industry, it's about saving what's there that is of high quality. So if you think about the Z line, a very competitive, very valuable, kind of highly specialized steel. Lake Erie Works within North America is the most high-tech, greenfield, integrated steel mill. So why would we assume that Canadian plants can't in fact compete within North America? So there's that first level. The second piece is that I think we do need to understand that the steel industry itself is many things. And the coking ovens, you're right, that's a very low-end product. Whereas if you look at some of the other products being developed, they're much more high-end. And for that reason, they do feed into the research and development. They have a different level of complexity, innovation contained within them, and they feed into other parts of the economy,
let me get the minister
which
in
is
here.
central.
Minister Rossetti.
So Charlotte's touched on something that I think we shouldn't overlook, because 75% of the steel produced today wasn't available 20 years ago. So to suggest that steel is a tired old industry isn't true. This is the backbone for our advanced manufacturing. We're talking about over 20,000 direct jobs and 100,000 indirect jobs in this country. It is significant and it is sizable. When you think of the changes that have been made around the rail car safety in Canada, those standards have been allowed to be met by high-grade, high-quality steels manufactured in North America and in Canada. When you look at the lighter, tougher steel that's made in the automotive industry to meet fuel regulations and the new standards that we're aiming for in auto, that's part of our advanced manufacturing framework that we need to ensure exists. I don't want to debate the fact that there's too much steel in the global market, because that's true, but that should not be Ontario's problem. That is a problem of those countries that are dumping steel on the world market and not playing by the rules.
Minister,
so I want to see the rules complied with.
Look at this chart,
and I want to see the federal government step up.
Bring this chart up. Forgive me,
rules are in
Minister, 1
place.
second. Bring the chart up and just let's look at what's happened to the price of steel over the past 5 years.
Right.
This is the price of steel around the world. And some people will look at that chart and say, you know what? Steel's done. It's just not coming back. And therefore, we're going to throw good money after bad. We're going to chase our tails here and not get anywhere.
Right.
What would you say to that argument?
I don't believe that. I mean, the price for steel has dropped periodically. SR, former Algoma Steel, was in bankruptcy protection in the early 90s, and in 2001, this has been a challenge in the North American sector, but we have WTO rules, we have trade remedy modernization that we need deployed in Canada to create fair trade, because Canadian companies cannot compete against a state-owned, state-subsidized government in the name of China. You can't. It is unfair trade. So you either believe in fair trade or you don't. And if we're just going to throw up our hands and say, and I agree, governments need to make a determination on this, whether or not we want a steel industry in this country and what that means to all of the ties into other industries and manufacturing, and what we're going to do with the 22,000 folks that work in that industry today, and where will they be working? To me, that doesn't seem like a responsible decision. I don't support that. Our government has been working hard to put in place supports that will help to modernize the sector in Ontario. We have some of the most competitive mills in the world right here in Ontario. Premier Wynne and Minister Duguid were in India meeting with the Ruia family that owns the SR as well. I know that we're doing everything we can, but we need the federal government, quite frankly, to implement trade remedy modernization.
Eleanor, you wanted to add?
Well, I think that chart that you showed really highlights the problem. I mean, whether the trade practices are fair or not, and I'm not saying they're fair and that they shouldn't be more fair, the fact is there's simply more supply than there is demand, and that's what's hurting people. That's what's hurting these producers, and that's the reason they're filing for bankruptcy protection. I mean, we could also look at a number of other commodities in this country that are hurting very badly. The iron ore mines in Quebec and Ontario that have been idled. You know, the Ring of Fire that held such promise in Ontario that I think we've talked about. Are we going to subsidize or look for ways to support those industries? The fact is that demand for some of these raw materials does not justify the existence of as much production in the world as is currently taking place, and that's going to have to come out somehow.
So let me ask Ian Lee, is doing nothing an option?
No, and I'm certainly not making that suggestion. Just leave them alone and let them die in Sault Ste. Marie. I'm not suggesting that at all. What we need, and we're almost sort of touching on the whole Trump phenomenon of these blue collar people who are suffering profoundly. And let's leave out the whole racism and the name calling and all the pejorative stuff. There's no question that there's a lot of people who are losers, who are unemployed against their own will. And so we can't ignore these people, whether they're in blue collar and steel or in automaking or whatever.
So you sympathize with his political instinct that we've got to do something.
We do, and we've got to engage in massive retraining. I don't think, and I have to respectfully disagree with Charlotte, and I know she's done excellent and outstanding research on this, but I've been in the service sector all my life, and I look at the stats all the time. We don't have these conversations about banks. What are we going to do to save the banks? They're one of our strongest sectors.
Oh my goodness me, in the aftermath of 2008-9, you're telling me we don't
we never bailed out the banks in Canada.
Absolutely.
No, we didn't.
There's all
and I'm a
kinds
former
of
banker,
subsidization
Charlotte.
at banks around the globe.
But let me go forward. I don't want to get off on that.
She's saying around the globe, not in Canada.
Okay, but I'm not talking around the globe. I'm talking Canada. What can we do in Canada? And in Canada, we have some strong service sectors that are doing gangbusters. There's over 1 million people in financial services in Canada in that area. There's over 1 million free educators like Charlotte and I. I mean, I can go on and on.
But what
There's
do we
many
do?
strengths.
What do we do for the Sioux?
We have to retrain the people who are going to clearly lose their job. And I hate to say this, but let me speak truth to power. That firm is already in bankruptcy, and it's going to get closed down or at least radically reduced. There is going to be significant unemployment in the Sioux, and we need to put resources in there to retrain these people. We can't just throw them overboard.
I don't believe that's our community has faced this situation before, and this industry has faced this before, and they have emerged, restructured, and have gone on with gainful employment in our community. And so I don't think that's the answer. And while we need to look at post-secondary training opportunities for people, I don't think we should ignore at the same time being a country that says, well, the EU, the United States, even India is placing duties and tariffs on Chinese dumped steel. Canada says, well, we're going to ignore that and say, well, we're not talking about a bailout. I'm talking about putting rules in place and regulations in place that are consistent with what other jurisdictions are doing, and let the glut of steel that is out there being produced by those who are producing it and attempting to dump it into other markets deal with the consequences.
Let me jump
Why
in
should
with a question
Ontario
here.
workers have to suffer because China chooses to dump steel in
Elena,
the
it wasn't too
globally?
long ago that a lot of people decided that GM and Chrysler were dead and we ought to let them go. Governments bought them. They're now bigger and better now than they've ever been. Should we do the same thing for steel?
People are buying more cars now than they were ever before. And I think the question is, do you think that the world is going to need more, forgive me, high-cost steel? And the lower cost, even if we make the rules more fair, we need to figure out whether that price curve, that graph that you showed, is going to change. And if you can convincingly make a business case that that's going to change, then that would seem to make some sense. But otherwise, it's really questionable to me that you would find ways to, I think the issue of retraining and thinking about other ways to develop some of these economies may make more sense in the
Can
long
you
term.
make the case?
Let's talk about carbon emissions as well.
Down to my last couple minutes.
What's the point of seeing the steel industry, some of the most efficient mills in the world, some of the cleaner mills in the world in terms of carbon emissions related to steel, not be here in Ontario any longer, and then us import steel from China that has 6 times the carbon footprint and 10 times the carbon emissions when you add transportation. That doesn't make any sense. We're turning off coal-fired generation. We've turned that off in Ontario under our government, but yet we're going to import steel from China at 10 times the carbon footprint. I say we should be putting the rules in place like every other jurisdiction. We shouldn't be last, or we are going to be the dumping ground for every other jurisdiction that wants to dump our steel. And those jobs will be here in Ontario.
I would go back to the 14 million number. We are producing much more steel than we are consuming, and we are exporting it into the glut. So it may be, the dumping may or may not be contributing to what's going on in Canada, but the fact is that we are producing more than we need.
Charlotte, I got 20 seconds before I lose my satellite. Charlotte, go ahead, make a last comment.
I guess what I'm suggesting is I find it interesting we're debating, whereas I think what we have here is a need for an integrated plan that takes into consideration cap and trade, the need for a transitional plan for employees. It's true, not all of them are going to work in the steel industry who currently are, and we need to engage in retraining, but we do have.
I said 20 seconds. They're right on the mark with that.
Follow up and this
Charlotte Yates, if you're watching this tonight, thanks so much for being with us on the line. Ian,
this
follow
isn't
up.
the steel. I agree with everything Ellen has said. The steel industry is not static. I think that the situation going out 3 and 4 and 5 years now is going to be way worse. Why? I've been reading up on the auto truck industry. President Obama just signed the executive order in 2012. In 2025, the car mileage requirements for cars and trucks are going to explode. They're going to go from 25 miles a gallon to 54 miles a gallon.
Friends,
so what are companies doing? They're switching to aluminum, and they're going to use less and less steel going forward.
Friends, forgive me for jumping in. That's our time tonight. I do want to thank David Orazietti, the minister from the Sioux, for joining us here at TVO tonight. Charlotte Yates, we already said hello to, and Ellen Acherney from the Wall Street Journal. She's the new global energy editor. Congrats to you on that. Ian Lee, thanks for making the trip in from the Sprott School at Carleton, and good luck with the budget lockup tomorrow.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.